Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0, episode 36. Today's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about Tbol, Turinabol Only versus Dbol, Dianabol Only with Para Pharma. So this is going to be a really, really fun one. You won't want to miss this one. And it's a cheap cycle. That's right off the bat. One of the advantages of doing this is cheap cycle. You can kind of see how these steroids behave in your body. And using them solo is kind of a cool thing. So in this one, we're going to go over everything. We're going to go over Para Pharma. If you've never heard of Para Pharma, you want to hear about them. You want to go over Tbol history. We're going to go over Dbol history. We're going to talk about dry versus wet, what exactly that means, and how that applies to you, and what are the advantages of running both of them solo, because they do things differently. How to run them solo. If you do want to run them solo, how much, how long, all that other good stuff. And then we're going to touch on training and diet on each, how your training and diet will change when you're using both. So first I'll bring in Mobster. Mobster, start us off on Para Pharma. They are a brand that's really, really catching fire over the past couple of years. But they've been around a long time. They have a lot of reviews out there, a lot of positive reviews. They seem to really be getting more and more popular as time goes on.
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, we've covered Para Pharma in previous shows, and as the date this podcast is being recorded, I think they've been around over a decade, Steve, 13 years. Obviously, it depends when you're listening. I've personally used Para Pharma, just literally run a small cut stack with Para Pharma products, so I can talk about how they feel. Something that I've discussed in previous shows when we've been talking about Para Pharma is you go to the Para Pharma website. Now, like a lot of labs, they have resellers, but I like to check out the actual company website to get the feel for the company before I use the products when I'm talking about recommendations and sources and why companies are approved and so on. So I've covered this multiple times. You go and look at the site. I like the fact straight away, and sometimes it can be a pain in the ass to find these things, Steve, but with Para Pharma, they've literally got a page with the lab analysis, with the test certificates right there for you to see. It's clean. The site is super tidy, super easy to look at, and so on and so forth. You've got the fact that the way that they brand and present their products is great for me. I like the fact that they're different in terms of the coloration and stuff like that. I've discussed how, for example, just the financial investment of making a product, and this could be baked beans, Steve, but we're talking about steroids today, performance enhanced products, needs to stand out in the marketplace, and they stand out in the marketplace, and that requires hundreds of thousands of dollars just to invest. Now, what about the actual quality of the product? In recent podcasts, literally just the last week that as we've been recording various shows, I've discussed, for example, that a member independently tested some of our approved sources, including Para Pharma, and all the products that we approved, all the labs that we approved came online. Para Pharma was right there in the mix. Absolutely no doubt about it whatsoever. When it comes to the age, by the time that a lab's been around, like we've already said, over a decade, this is a sign of quality. Why? Because any company that lasts in a very competitive market, when it comes to performance enhancing products, needs to be around a long ass time. And over 10 years is a long ass time in this market. I know labs, Steve, that have lasted less than a year. I've seen how some labs have produced product. You can go on YouTube, guys, and check out videos. People are literally homebrewing in their kitchen, homebrewing in garages, homebrewing in warehouses. It's horrendous. So you need companies that have, for example, videos of the production process, showing them they're not homebrewing, they're showing you the proper machines that they're using. You get an idea of the quality control that's involved just by looking at these videos. This is the kind of stuff that you want. And you want this of an approved source. So we regard Para Pharma in that particular way, Steve, incredibly high for that particular reason. And then, of course, I come down to my own personal experience. As an example, and I'll just quote something that I quoted in a recent podcast again. You have labs out there where you can take products and feel no different on versus off. And yet you get a quality product, arrives, you try it, and literally within a day or two, you feel like you're on product, you feel like you're on testosterone, you feel like you're on trend or whatever. And I can guarantee you that those sensations are right there, Steve. I've literally personally experienced their product, tried it, tested it, used it, and tell them, Steve, I've literally felt their product working. So I can absolutely hand on heart say that I've used Para Pharma. I regard Para Pharma incredibly highly, and all the things that I'm looking for that Para Pharma has in spades. What do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, Para Pharma, look, they have a lot of reviews, as I said earlier, and a lot of people using them. You got gym rats all the way up to professional bodybuilders who use their stuff. Their orals are excellent, their injectables are excellent. So in this one, we're going to talk about their Tbol and their Dbol, and both of them are really, really good. They're not expensive at all. They're very, very cheap. You can run a cycle for less than it would cost you to detail your car, so it's a really, really good deal. And they make it easy. They have a great shipping situation where they'll ship it to you very, very fast. They have a great situation with their customer service, and they want to make sure that they keep the customers happy. That's why people who use Para Pharma, they keep going back. They have a huge retention rate with customers. Once you go Para Pharma, you won't want to go back to anyone else. So really, really good brand. And you got to be careful what you use out there because, look, Tbol, they could send you something that's not Tbol. They could send you something else, and you're not going to know it. And it's going to screw up your cycle. Same thing with Dbol. They could send you something that's not Dbol, screw up your cycle, and give you not what you're looking for in terms of what your goals are. So it's really important. A lot of these sources and these brands out there they're incompetent. They're scammers. They don't know what they're doing. They don't care. They just want to put the product out and sell the product. They even know, hey, they get it tested and they're like, well, this stuff is off. Well, I'm just going to sell it anyway because I don't want to have to go through the hassle of redoing this entire batch. So they cut corners and they do all this kind of stuff. But Para Pharma, they're not like that. They're high quality. And, look, at the end of the day, they are absolutely a wonderful brand that Mobster and I both will definitely trust to use. Go ahead.
Yeah, but let me just jump back in for a second here. Listen, right? And this applies to any approved lab, but I'm going to specifically talk about Para Pharma again. So we do what we do, listeners, all of us, to improve our body, to improve how we feel in the gym, to get strong, to get lean, to become more muscular, to put quarter of an inch on our biceps, right? And we make the choice to use performance enhancement. At some point, we dip our toe in the waters and we say, listen, we go onto the forums, our forums, many forums, but we'll talk about our forums here. And we say, guys, can you tell me a good source? I want to do this, I want to do that. And they might have a stack, Steve, that we might tweak for them or whatever else. Ultimately, at some point, they make a choice. And it's going to come down to things like how long does it take to get to me? Customer service if there are any issues, those lab tests and analysis certificates of analysis that I love to see, Steve, from every approved source. I like the fact that this stuff is up to date and so on and so forth. And then literally, if I'm going to put the work in the gym, if I'm going to absolutely kill myself to get that quarter of an inch, to get that half an inch, to gain another 3 or 4 pounds, so if I'm going to go out and make sure that my freezer is full of all the good, nutritious, organic food that's costing me hundreds of dollars, hundreds of pounds, Steve, I absolutely want the lab that I'm using to be tip top. I want the product to be tip top. So whether it's direct or whether it's via a reseller, and this is my example, Steve, my products were via UK reseller and they got to me in 5 days. That's fantastic. And again, you're looking at batch numbers, you're looking when the product was manufactured, you look at expiry dates, all this kind of stuff. You don't want, for example, Steve, and I've had this, products that have turned up and they're just on the cusp of expiring. Okay, they're probably fine, etc., but I'd rather have something that's got 2 years left to go. I don't want stuff like that. It doesn't care if it's in a sale. I want solid ass products that does exactly what it says on the label. And bearing in mind what we're talking about today when we're talking about Tbol and Dbol, I don't want something that's labeled as a dry type steroid like Turinabol. to be Dbol because it's a lot cheaper to make. It's a lot easier for companies to cheat that kind of stuff and use the wrong rules and all that kind of thing, like Steve said. So it's got to be what I want. If I'm going to be estrogen prone, if I'm going to be the kind of person that gets watery very, very quickly, but I wanted to dry stack, I wanted to, a way of getting into shape, then I want that lab to be tip top. Let's talk about Dianabol history, Steve, and I'll jump back in with some Tbol history.
Yeah, so let's get into the Dbol first of all. So Dr. John Ziegler was the first distributor of Dbol to United States Olympic athletes. And this was done after he became suspicious at the 1960 European Championships that the Russians were doping their athletes. So he ended up being correct. And after giving the Dbol to his U.S. athletes, it became evident that the performance enhancing benefits of the drugs were huge. So there was a Cold War doping battle for years until proper anti-doping testing was developed. It was all about let's win the Olympics, let's beat our competition. So look, it was a second steroid to be produced after pure testosterone derivatives. And it was produced from straight suspension. So you got to think of Dbol as oral testosterone. And it has two differences. It has an added double carbon bond at 1-2 and also a 17 alpha alkylated addition. And 17 alpha alkylated addition allows it to, enter the liver and pass without being destroyed by the liver. Now, andriol was designed as oral testosterone, but the problem with andriol, this is why andriol is garbage in my opinion, is that it is not 17 alpha alkylated. So if you take andriol, it's not going to get absorbed. It's just going to be destroyed in the body. So it's not going to really do you any good. It's going to be very, very weak effect. So Dianabol, if you want something and if you want testosterone in oral form, Dianabol is definitely going to be the one that you want to go with. So if you like using injectable testosterone and you're like, man, I want to run just an oral only cycle, or I want my friend to see what testosterone feels like, Dianabol is a really, really good choice. You're going to get a lot of the same side effects as you would on testosterone. You're going to get a lot of the same benefits as you would on testosterone as well. So it's going to be very similar, except you're going to get more of a liver hit. And that's why you need to make sure you're running, obviously, your liver support while you're on Dianabol, as well as Tbol, as well as Mobster will get into shortly. So the added carbon bond is supposed to reduce aromatization. So it's supposed to convert less into estrogen than testosterone. But because we're using Dianabol at PED dosages, this idea is kind of thrown out the window. Anyone who's run Dianabol, let's say you run Dianabol at 30 milligrams or 40 or 50 milligrams, which is a pretty hefty dose, you're definitely going to get a lot of aromatization in the body. So, but if you run Dianabol at 2.5 milligrams a day, you'll probably be okay. 5 milligrams a day, you'll probably be okay. Even maybe 10 milligrams a day. But that's not the way to run these PEDs. We always jack the dose up of these PEDs beyond the therapeutic dosage of what they were designed to be ran for, because we're trying to get performance benefits, you see. So that's why when you run Dianabol, the way it was designed, they wanted to cut down on the aromatization, but in reality, you're not getting that difference in how it's run. So I'll let you touch on that a little bit, Mobster, and then I want to get into the side effects of Dianabol so people can understand Dianabol, and then you can kind of transition us into Tbol, because I know you want to talk about Tbol. You love Tbol.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of the history of the iron game, and I've got several books here that talk about Ziegler and York Barbell and the lifters. And also, as Steve and I have discussed on other shows, we've talked about the dosages of the golden age. When we were talking about the golden age for us, we were talking about the mid-70s. I've spoken to people just after that period of time, a little bit older than me, but on the cusp of the 70s, early 80s, when they were doing their thing, just as I came into the game and started lifting weights. And the dosages they were using when Dianabol was used for performance enhancement, to enhance weightlifting, were tiny, Steve. We were talking about 1, 2, I think people were talking about 5 milligrams. And it was only towards the end of the time that the York bubble lifters kind of got out of control. But don't forget, guys, we're talking about the 60s here. So there was a lot of love and peace and other drug use, etc. And they took the same attitude, I think, Steve, to the performance enhancement as they were taking to the recreational drugs that they were using. So they started off with the scientific, quote unquote, dosages that Dr. John was trying to get them to use. And eventually they started just taking handfuls of pills and writing the scripts out themselves and all that kind of stuff. We could talk about that with regards to Primo and a bunch of other drugs that were being used at the time. And as Steve says again, and I think that key phrase that Steve used there, which was super, super important, was the difference between medical use, and Dianabol did have a medical use when it was created, versus Tbol, which we will get into, which is slightly different in that regards, versus performance enhancement. And of course, performance enhancement at that time, Steve, was simply more weight lifted for Olympic lifters. Unfortunately, the Americans at that time, and to be perfectly honest, since the Russians were just ahead, and they've stayed ahead. So while they definitely got stronger, and you saw some all-time records at that time, you didn't see them getting ahead of the Russians. Back to you briefly, Steve, as you said, for the side effects, and I'll come back in with some Tbol history.
Yeah, so Dianabol, look, at the end of the day, even though this is designed to be less aromatization, convert to estrogen than testosterone, that's not the reality as I explained to you. So when you get high amounts of estrogen in the body, that's going to be your main side effect to watch out for Dianabol, and it's going to dissuade many of you from using it. Like for example, today, based on and Steve's present form, Dbol wouldn't be one that I would use because I don't want excess estrogen. I don't want the excess bloat. I don't want the excess blood pressure increase, the heart rate increase, resting heart rate increase. I don't want any of that. So someone like a mobster who's more strength training at present, he would be more open to using Dbol. But there was a time where that wasn't the case for me. There was a time where I was going through my little phase of, being skinny my whole life, wanting to bulk up, wanting to get big, wanting to get stronger. So in that case, I didn't mind the excess estrogen. I didn't mind having that bloat, a little bit of bloat that I was getting. So at the end of the day, that's going to separate whether you're going to use this or not. And we're going to get into, how to dose them later on. And we're going to talk about dry versus wet on the fourth segment. But look, at the bottom line is excess estrogen can cause a lot of side effects, and it's a domino effect. So we have to make sure that if you are estrogen prone, you're aware of that, number one. Number two, you got to make sure that you're either using an aromatase inhibitor or you're having them on hand, and those are going to help with the estrogen side effects. So the estrogenic side effects can cause a lot of different things. It can cause, like I said, it's going to cause you some heart strain. It's going to cause you, the moon face is very common with Dianabol. If you ever see guys in the gym walking around, they went from having kind of like a more square face to more of a round face, and they look really, really bigger, and you've noticed them getting really, really stronger out of nowhere. They're probably using Dianabol, possibly Dianabol and testosterone together. They're getting quite a bit. And then really the nightmare scenario when it comes to estrogen is gynecomastia, which are bitch tits, and that's not something you want to mess around with, and it's really embarrassing. Imagine taking off your shirt at the beach and having man boobs, and that's not something we want to do for sure. So that's the side effects of it. So you want to make sure, but like I said, you can control them with an aromatase inhibitor. So Aromacin, Arimidex are going to be good options. Letro is a worst case scenario option, and you can also use Letro as well. In a worst case scenario, you don't want to use it, in my opinion, unless it's absolutely necessary, but it does work really well in a pinch. And if you do have gynecomastia flare up, you want to basically add in Novadex as well. Novadex and Letro, I think, is a really, really good for 90% of you out there. Really good for gynecomastia if it starts flaring up. So don't mess around with gynecomastia. If it starts coming on, you start feeling the nipple irritation, you start noticing a lump, just come off the Dbol immediately. You need to stop the Dbol and then jump on your anti-estrogens right away to get that taken care of. Now, the other aspect of the side effects is something I mentioned earlier, it being 17 alpha alkylated. And Tbol is the same way, which Mobster will get into shortly. But with that, you can expect completely normal to have liver strain. And liver strain is going to be one of those things where you're going to get your blood work done, your ASC and your ALT levels are going to be high. Now, it's normal on Dbol, it's normal to have those numbers high. It's a question of does the number normalize when we come off, and that's what we really have to keep an eye on. And it should in most cases, unless you do have liver damage. But if you run the cycle correctly and you're not drinking alcohol and you're not doing these other things that harm the liver, it shouldn't be a problem. And if you don't have a bad liver to begin with, it shouldn't be a problem. Another thing too is the androgenic side effects with Dianabol. And because Dianabol is far more androgenic than Tbol is, as Mobster will talk about shortly, you're going to deal with androgenic side effects. You could be dealing with more aggression. You're going to get stronger in the gym, which comes hand in hand with getting aggressive, unlike Tbol. And then you may get a little bit of a mental change to you. Your attitude might change. You might get a little more short with people, stuff like that. But overall, with Dianabol, it does improve your mood. But if you get in a situation where you're hungry or you're not sleeping well or something, you may become a little short with people. Those are kind of the androgenic side effects that a lot of steroids have. And this can be a possibility. And then, of course, you have the shutdown. Dianabol will shut down your HPTA, so you want to make sure you have a PCT on hand. And we're going to get into that short on the fifth segment of the podcast on how you want to dose Para Pharma Dianabol. So at the end of the day, there are different side effects. You want to be aware. You want to be running your on-cycle support. You want to have a PCT in place and all that good stuff. And we'll touch on that exactly when we show you how to dose them shortly. But bring in Mobster to talk about Tbol. And Tbol is one of my favorites as well. I like Tbol. It's really good for athletes. It doesn't come with estrogen side effects. I'll kind of let Mobster touch on its history, what side effects that you can expect on it, and all the other good stuff. And we'd love to hear more about Mobster's experiences with Tbol before we get into the next topic after that, which is dry versus wet. So go ahead, Mobster. Tell us all about Tbol. Share your knowledge.
Tbol history first, and I'm going to refer to the article, but I'm going to throw in a few mobsterism type comments or whatever while we're doing it, right? Because God help me, Steve, I was old enough and ugly enough to remember being around at the time when this product was developed. So that's how ancient I am. Right. So Tbol was introduced by the pharmaceutical company Genopharm in East Germany in the 1960s, which is when I was born. The sole goal was to get a competitive edge for the male and female athletes in the Olympics, which I'm going to touch on momentarily. The success of East German Olympians in the 60s through to the 80s can be directly traced to Tbol use. There was a Tbol doping program, Stasi 14.25. This is the whole, some of you might recall seeing news items and documentaries where athletes were being given pills and just told to take them by their coaches, and they wasn't necessarily told what it was. And this whole thing was kept secret until the 1990s when Germany was finally unified. It is one of the few steroids in history that has developed solely for performance enhancement purposes and not for medical use. Now, let me touch on this very briefly. This is the sort of stuff I recall from that time. So what happened, and Steve and I have talked about this on other shows, the news items of the time, the evening news, the newspapers, especially the more quote-unquote intelligent newspapers, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Times in the UK, New York Times, etc., they started to include photographs, Steve, of Russian and specifically, in this case, East German athletes. And the whole question started to come up. Some of these women, never mind the men, were so big, so strong. And of course, you've got to remember that state-sponsored sport programs, and I'm thinking of China, Russia, and other places, were particularly looking for athletes that were fantastically good at the events. So, for example, the shot put, that's male and female. So what you want is a really big, heavy Russian shot putter woman. Now, if you're giving them drugs, you're just enhancing their strength and their muscular size and so on and so forth. The Olympic committee, as whatever they were called at the time, Steve, and the newspapers and other sport and countries that were getting their asses handed to them, started to ask questions. And it literally came down to, is this a man pretending to be a woman? So it got absolutely crazy. And of course, they were using testosterone and Dbol and other drugs, as we've already discussed, to enhance their athletes' abilities. So Turinabol came along as a specific drug where the masculinizing effects on women and the estrogenic effects in terms of loads of water and really big bulks, obviously at that time for all and sundry to look at, this person is on drugs. So the Tbol came along, was developed to lessen that. So you had an athlete that could still perform at a fantastically high level, but didn't have this massive bulk, great big watery lump walking around, male or female. Has it got a penis? That kind of stuff, Steve. It was kind of fucked up. A big deal for the time, as you can imagine, because it was front page, back page, everything in the newspapers. It was an evening news thing. It was absolutely crazy and fucked up. So this is the reason why the product was developed. Now, I will say, as we talk about the chemistry here, although Tbol and Dbol are almost the same thing, and again, I'm referring to the article here, the difference is there's an added fluorochemical alteration to Tbol, which differentiates the two steroids. It has a 0 androgenic rating and a mild anabolic rating, meaning basically what we talk about, and we're going to touch on this in a bit, dry gains, because you're not holding tons of water vis-a-vis the aromatization and estrogenic activity, and it's not a crazy strength enhancer, but I call it athletic enhancer, Steve, because you're able to perform a sport that requires some speed, again, shot put, discus, javelin, and so on. Certainly wouldn't enhance you for running around a track, but you need to be able to do that sport at an explosive power. So you need to move fast, quickly, but momentarily. And this is a great drug for that. Again, in terms of athletics. Now, for us in the gym, what does that mean? Dbol, for example, like Steve says, gives you a great pump. You're lifting more weight in the gym, but you're not necessarily doing more sets and reps. The athletic side of this sport means that you are. Now, like I said, you're not going to go out running a marathon on Tbol, but you are going to be able to perform close to your athletic ability for longer periods of time. Again, all the events that I've discussed require multiple attempts on the field, and especially, again, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and so on and so forth. You might have a best out of 3, etc., etc. So the ability to perform at a high level, momentarily, high burst of explosive power is, again, another reason why Tbol was developed, Steve. What does it also mean? It means, although there are some side effects, and it's specifically, like Steve said already, because it's 17 alpha alkylated, it's a will stress deliver. You're not going to get the gyno, you're not going to get the water. And again, anytime we say these things, Steve, and I think I referred to Dbol as well, as an example, I've seen pro level stacks, and when we talk about stacks, of course, we're talking about multiples of drugs, never mind multiples of the dosages. I've seen, for example, Dbol run as high as 100 milligrams a day for short periods of time at the beginning of a competitive bodybuilder stack. When we run at what Steve and I like to call sensible dosages, the difference between the two would be, and again, we're going to talk about this in a bit, dry versus wet. You're way more likely to have estrogenic issues. You're way more likely to hold water on Dbol versus Tbol. And this is another reason, and I'm going to use this phrase later on as well, where it's a massive, massive guru favorite. And it's definitely, if you are more athletic, if you're more energetic, if you do have activities outside the gym, my choice would be Tbol every time over Dbol. What do you think on that, Steve?
Yeah, and I love Tbol. Like I talked about the last segment, how Dbol wasn't up my alley at this present time based on my goals. And it's going to be up a lot of you alley. Now, Tbol is more up my alley. I like to do boot camp training. I do like hot Pilates and stuff like that. And if I was running Dbol and doing that, it would be a disaster. So if you're you like to do boot camp training and hot Pilates and hot yoga and CrossFit and any of those things which require a lot of endurance and you want to, get ripped abs and stuff like that, then Tbol is right up your alley. And it's good because it gives you all the benefits of anabolic steroids, all the good benefits without the bad. The only bad benefit that you're going to notice on Tbol is liver strain, which is going to happen on anabolic steroids in general, especially liver toxic 17 alpha alkylated anabolic steroids such as Tbol and Dbol. You're going to obviously have suppression on Tbol as well. So those are really the two negatives that you would experience on Tbol. And it's not going to be much though, because you're not going to be on these oral steroids for a long time. So let's get into dry versus wet a little bit, Mobster. So why don't you start us off on this? And we've kind of touched a little bit on this so far, but if a lot of people out there, they've never run a dry compound, they've only run wet, and then vice versa. A lot of people have only run dry, not wet. And some of you are not experienced with these anabolic steroids, so you don't really understand what we mean when we say dry versus wet. So why don't you kind of get into it a little bit?
Right. So Steve touched upon my use of Dbol and enhancement of strength in the gym. And the reason for this, if I know, and this is the thing, right? And it comes from experienced users, and that includes Stevesmi and myself, knowing how we respond physically to a certain dose of a performance enhancement drug. Okay. So for example, why is Dbol good for me? Now, it's not necessarily good for me at my massive body weight, Steve. Walking around holding another 5 or 10 pounds of water is not healthy. However, I know that if I do hold some increased muscle tissue and a certain amount of increased water, aka being a wet steroids, that leverage around the joint, and I'm going to use my elbow as a good example, around the bicep, around the top of the forearm, around my elbow, is going to mean that when I bench press, I'm going to have greater leverage. So not only am I getting the strength enhancement from the drug itself, but the water is actually going to be great around the joint. And as a great example of Steve, if I was competing, I'm putting a lot more stress on my body. So that water actually supports the joint, which might otherwise be under a much heavier load. And I'm going to have joint issues. So literally sometimes in a particular perverse way, if you like, having that little bit of water is actually going to be more comfortable for me while I'm training my fucking ass off and trying to win competitions, also make a big weight or big lift. Now, here's the thing, okay? And this is the reason why when you're new to the game and you're trying to make the right choices, there are head fucks out there. And what do I mean by that? So I'm thinking of people on the cuts versus bulking, Steve, but the same rules apply. Yeah. Now, if you're a young fella or young lady coming into the game and you've got abs on view, even if it's just one row of the top row of your abs, okay, you're a little bit underweight and you make the decision, I want to gain some muscle, Steve. I want to get more muscular. I want to get a little bit bigger. I want a quarter of an inch on my biceps. I want an inch on my chest. What can fuck you up is the blur. When you add water, you kind of lose definition. Now, I know when I come off Dbol that I'm going to lose some of that water. And again, of course, I'm going to manage that with AIs on cycle, like Steve said, do a proper PCT. I'm going to change my diet. I can increase my cardio. But again, if you're new to the game, losing the definition can be a bit of a mind fuck. It can be sort of, I've put on too much weight. I've got like a sort of bloated look like Steve's described earlier on in the podcast around my face. The moon face is a classic one. You know, if I don't mind, it's fine. But if it's a problem for me, if I want to stay lean looking and add muscle tissue, then I should have chosen Tbol. I should have chosen a drier product. And another drier product, for example, Steve, would be Anavar. I know for a fact, and it's just my personal experience, that if I use Anavar, I don't pile on loads of weights. I'm currently on the bulk, guys, and I think since the start of the bulk to now, I'm up over 10 pounds. Now, I'm not going to hold all that 10 pounds, and I don't want to. When I come off, I'm quite happy to lose it, or it's fine. But right now, because of the strength things I'm doing, it suits my purposes. It suits my aim. But for example, in Anavar, I always got stronger on Anavar. I love using Anavar for that particular reason, but I don't get massively heavy. So a lot of this comes down to the right choice for the situation that you find yourself in. Now, listeners, you're listening to this, that means you're probably interested in one or the other drug. and it's about making the right choice for you in your circumstances. Do you want to gain loads of weight? Do you want to gain muscle that you keep? Do you want to keep a 50-50? Do you want to simply be stronger, and so on and so forth? So what do you think on that? Picking the right drug, Steve, for the right choice, but specifically your own experience of wet versus dry.
Yeah, and this is an interesting podcast because we're talking about Para Pharma Dbol versus Para Pharma Tbol. And the interesting thing is they're night and day. They're polar opposites. So if you your goals are, to bulk up and you don't mind the water weight, you just want to get big, you want to put on weight, you want the scale to move, and you go on Tbol, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go on Dbol, you're like, damn, I'm putting on 5, 10, 15 pounds on this stuff within 2-3 weeks. Like, what's going on here? This is more than I've ever expected. But then you run Tbol and you're like, oh, I only make 1-2 pounds the whole cycle. What's going on? They're completely different. And vice versa. You're looking to cut, you want to like go and do athletic stuff. You're CrossFit, lots of, CrossFit, a lot of endurance. You want to go run a mile. You want to do this, you want to do that. So you go on Dbol. And then you're running Dbol and you're like, damn, like, what's going on here? My time is, I lost like 2 minutes off my mile time. I was running a 7-minute mile. Now I'm running a 9-minute mile. I'm getting pumps in my calves. I can't even, run. I can't even walk because the pumps that I'm getting in my calves. I'm doing CrossFit and we have to run around, the warehouse and do low rep exercises and take 10 seconds between sets, and I'm running out of, I got no endurance. I can't even breathe. What's going on here? I feel heavy. Well, because you're running Dbol. You should have run Tbol. If you run Tbol, then you're like, damn, I'm faster. I have more, I'm getting more of a condition. I feel more conditioning on this stuff. I don't get winded as easy on this stuff. I'm stronger, but I'm not like incredibly stronger where it's like it's obvious that I'm taking something. There's Tbol for you. That's what Tbol does. So that's why I like Tbol. Tbol, I can run Tbol, and it's not something that's going to give me these incredible gains. It's not going to destroy my conditioning. It's not going to make me winded when I go and do endurance stuff. I like to do a lot of endurance stuff. I like to go kayaking, canoeing, boating, swimming. I like to do this type of activity, hiking, right? Hike up a hill, run up a hill, hike up a mountain. You can't do that on Dbol, but you can do it on Tbol. Tbol is a good one for that. So these are structured completely different. So this is a really, really good experiment that you guys can try. You can run a Dbol cycle, and then you can run a Tbol cycle at a later time, or vice versa, and see the differences that we're talking about for yourself. And it's a really, really cool one to do. Go ahead, Mobster.
Something else, Stephen. I'm going to use a phrase what I call, it's not my own particular phrase. I didn't invent it. Keepable gains. Okay. So Steve and I have touched on this on other shows when we've talked about other products, other cycles, and so on and so forth. Here's the thing, and again, it's a bit of a head fuck if you're new to the game, new to performance enhancement, and your desire to pile on the weight is absolutely crazy. You can't see anything else, right? So Steve and I have touched on this, and we say you are better off. I think I'll actually quote Steve in this particular way. You're better off gaining 3 or 4 pounds per cycle and running a couple of cycles, moderate, sensible dosages per year, and then over time, especially if you keep at it, guys, that all adds up. Now, I can give you an example. I'm thinking of Anadrol here, Steve, where I've heard of people gaining 16, 20 pounds on cycle. I think even at my level now, that would be horrendous. But if you're a young, skinny guy, that can sound like the fairy godmother's waved a magic wand and given you a special gift. The reality is you come off cycle, even if your PCT was great, even if you use some of my tips and tweaks to get as much of those gains and keep as much as possible, you're not going to keep 20 pounds. Now, this is especially true the first time that you run anything like that. Your gains are going to be crazy, especially your first cycle ever. And you might, on a 20 pound, if you absolutely gain that kind of, you might keep half. I think here with Tbol, Turinabol from Para Pharma, if I gained 3 or 4 pounds, Steve, I'd probably keep £3 or £4. And that, listeners, is amazing. It doesn't sound like a lot, when, especially if you're young and new to the game. £3 or £4, I want to gain £10, I want to gain £16. Well, motherfucker, you can do that. You're just going to have to run another couple of stacks, but you're going to keep the gains. Now, again, I respond incredibly well to Dianabol, Steve, and I've gained, and I've told this on other shows, £4 in 4 days. From Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the scale's gone up £4. At the end of the cycle, I might have gained £10. But how much am I keeping of that? I'm probably keeping the same £4, maybe £5 that I'd get on Tbol. So it's very much a case of function, that athletic ability, the still doing all the things that Steve talks about, and keeping the few pounds that you gain a lot easier than 40 or 50% of whatever I gained on Dianabol, Steve. So the keepable gains, and this is another reason why gurus absolutely love Turinabol versus gaining loads of weight and being lucky to keep maybe. You do incredibly well, listeners, if you kept 50%. I'd actually say on Dianabol, I think I'd be happy if I kept 40% of what I gained on cycle. But Turinabol, if I gained £3, Steve, I'd keep £3. The keepable gains are super, super important. What do you think on that?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because look, you go on Dbol, and yeah, you can run a bunch of Dbol and you can gain 10, 15 pounds. But think about it. Think of how silly that is. So you're going to run 10 cycles like that, and you're going to gain, what, 100 to 150 pounds? That's not realistic. I tell people that all the time. I remember some guy's a smart ass on the forum. He'd always make smart ass comments. So, I told him this. I was like, well, you're not going to gain and keep 10, 15 pounds each cycle. And he's like, yeah, why not? I've done it before. I'm like, oh, really? You've done it before? How many cycles have you run? He's like, I've run 5 cycles and I gain 10. So I'm like, you're telling me in 5 cycles, you've gained anywhere from 50 to 75 pounds? I'm like, if you started out at 200 pounds, now you'd be 275 pounds. You'd be on the Mr. Olympia stage if you gained and kept 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. And then he never responded again. So that's a perfect example of unrealistic expectations and not understanding how the body works. It's called survival. You're going to gain a bunch of weight, but you're also going to give it back. And if not for that, you're basically going to end up giving yourself a stroke. I mean, you gain that much weight and you're holding that much water. That's not good for your heart health. And that's not good for your kidneys. That's not good for everything. So it's going to be completely natural for you to give it back and completely normal. So the body has ways to regulate water, and it has ways to regulate your body weight. And it's trying to keep you alive. It's going to do its best to keep you alive. That's the way it works. So the next thing we're talking about, next segment, is how to dose them solo. So I'm going to talk about both, Mobster, and then I'm going to give my way to run them, and then you give your way to run them. And then this way, the guys at home, who are listening to this, they can kind of make the decision themselves on what to do based on both of our situations. So Mobster and I
suspect, Steve, that we're probably going to be very, very close. So what I might do is, I suspect we're going to be close. I think I'll just throw in a few examples of what I've heard some crazy motherfuckers are using. But I think we're going to be very, very close on the dosages. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. And Mobster and I, we didn't discuss this on the pre-show. So it's very, very important that we do that, give different perspectives. We also keep in mind, Mobster and I have different perspectives on things too. You can come on the forum and see what Mobster, his goals are, what his physique, and then look at my physique and what my goals are. So we're different. So look, at the end of the day, like, let's start with Dianabol, because that's what we first started to talk about. So with Dianabol, I would run it anywhere from 20 to 50 milligrams a day. And if you go on the higher end with Dianabol, I would definitely stack in either Aromacin or Arimidex with it to keep your estrogen under control. And I would go on that anywhere from 4 to 7 weeks. And you should be able to get really, really good results on that stack. Running it like that. You want to make sure you're running your liver support as well. You want to make sure you have a PCT in place. You don't need this huge PCT, because you got to remember, it's going to be in your system fast. It's going to be out of your system fast. It's not like running long ester injectables Long-ester injectables, you're running them for 10 or 12 weeks, plus you've got the esters that have to clear. That will take 5-6 more weeks. So you've shut down for a really long time, 16 weeks, 18 weeks, 20 weeks of being shut down. So yeah, you need an extensive PCT. But in this case, if you're only running it 4 to 7 weeks, you can basically run a 4-week to 6-week PCT, and you can just stick to low dose serum therapy, Clomid, Nolvadex, and then you can run a natural testosterone booster with it. Nice thing about Para Pharma, they get you covered. They've got excellent on cycle, they got excellent Romacin, excellent Arimidex, excellent Letro if you want to keep that on hand. Then for PCT, they got excellent Clomid and excellent Nolvadex. So boom, you're covered. Now, when it comes to Tbol, I would run Tbol depending on your situation, but I would run it going anywhere from 30 milligrams up to 60 milligrams. Now, if you're a pure bodybuilder and you want to use it for weight training mostly, I'd go more on the high end. But if you're more of an endurance athlete, you want to use it for endurance, you don't want to get too bad pumps if you're doing a lot of endurance. So you want to stick to the lower end. I'll stick to the lower end when I'm using it for my athletic stuff that I do. Like if you want to play basketball, even I didn't even mention that. Great. If you want to play basketball, one of the greatest steroids you could run for if you want to get better at basketball and get more conditioning and more strength and everything while you play basketball, tennis, any of these sports, you want to go on the lower end. Now, how long to run it? Look, you can run it anywhere from 4 weeks up to 8 weeks. It really just depends on your situation. If you want to be really careful on the liver, you can run it the more 4 weeks. If you want to push it a little bit, you can go more 8 weeks. Same thing with Dianabol. You can go ahead and run the same type of PCT. Low dose, serum therapy, Nolvadex or Clomid, or both, low dose. And then you could stack in a strong testosterone booster with it. AC Generate is a really, really good testosterone booster, has everything in it. And then on cycle, you want to make sure you're running your N2 guard support supplements because it has the milk thistle, it's got the tutka, it's got all the things for your liver, your kidneys, your heart, and everything. So it's really, really important to run your support supplements both on and off cycle. And that's fine. That will work perfectly well. So Mobster, what are your ideas for Dbol and Tbol, and how would you run them, and how would you PCT?
Right, so I've run Dianabol as high as 50 milligrams, but my sweet spot for me, Steve, has always been 30. And again, if you lack the experience to know how your body responds, I would always suggest going in at a lower dosage. So that would be 30 milligrams per day. Some products out there are higher dose, but I prefer products that are in 10 milligram. This is a lot easier to split up and use for the day. Typically, and I know that some of the listeners might have done this already, we even use Dianabol as a kind of pre-workout, so they'll make sure they take one before they go to the gym. Because of the half-life, Steve, which is around 8 hours, my preference is always going to be for splitting it up 3 times through the day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening before I go to bed. In terms of time on, and I'm thinking of one particular person on the forum, Steve, that we know very well, does podcast himself. He's a massive one for very short oral cycles, mostly because, and this is a thing that's super, super important when you're choosing either of these drugs, having the choice of what you want to do for your specific aims and so on and so forth. So, for example, he always talks about 4-week cycles. I've never had a single issue, Steve, at any point with the idea of running an oral cycle of either of these two medications for 6 to 8 weeks. So my preference, for example, if I was only running Dianabol and I wasn't doing anything else, would be a 6 to 8 week cycle, 30 milligrams per day. I'll echo some of Steve's comments with regards to products like N2 Guard, HG Generate, etc., afterwards and running proper PCT. In the case of Dianabol, I would definitely have an aromatase inhibitor on hand. And I say that because actually my recommendation to run one from day one. Others have a particular choice and they wait till they see issues. I've never had that particular thing. Tbol, I've not run this myself, but you can talk about examples of what I've seen and heard. So, for example, again, this is all about weight class, athletic endeavors. If you're doing running, if you're hill walking, like Steve talking about, if you are doing athletic events like we've discussed already, And I'm thinking of weight classes here, Steve, where you don't want to gain too much, but you're still an athletic ability. So I'd go from the lower end in that particular example of 20 milligrams and to the higher end, and this is more for bodybuilding purposes, of 50 milligrams, and that's for men. And for women, as low as 2.5 to 7.5 milligrams per day. And again, you have to remember, and I'll refer to the article here, Steve, the Russian Stasi, the whole Russian weightlifters joke, etc., and the kind of comments that I touched upon earlier on. But again, thinking about why Turinabol was developed specifically, so it's about athletic ability. But again, it's that thing of getting the ladies in this example to perform athletically versus pile on loads and loads of muscle. And again, dry gains, hard muscle, functional muscle versus, well, it's also got a half-life of 16 hours, Steve, but again, people typically take two doses, split the dosages up per day. On that particular example, again, I'm thinking of the women, buy a pill splitter, because you're going to be trying to take a fraction of a dose, typically, of what's available in per day. So you're going to want to split the pill up and put it into the system in that particular way. Again, this is super, super important for either drug. You need, and this applies to any performance enhancing drug that we talk about on this podcast, picking what you need, having on hand what you need for the particular requirements, your target, your aim, and so on. So I've used drugs that I've used specifically for strength, like we said earlier on, including Dianabol. If I was using Turinabol, I would be thinking of function. I would be thinking of doing some of the athletic things that Steve described. And so therefore my choices would be different. And that's why, again, Para Pharma has different products to offer you different things, different ways of putting stacks together for your choice, for your aims. That's another reason why we recommend you should come on the forum, Steve, and tell us, run a log and tell us what you want, tell us what you're doing. One thing I will say, and this applies to Para Pharma again specifically, we how many times, Steve, do people say, this is what I could get from my source, and it's really not what they wanted for the target that they told us they want. I want to lose weight, I want to gain weight, I want a six pack, I want to get strong on a bench press, and they've just got something out of the bag of the guy down the gym, and it's what he had available, versus you buying specifically what you need. And again, that's the reason why you're listening to this podcast, and make sure that you make the right choice from these two for your aim. And now, Steve, I will say, and this is one thing that Steve can comment on as well if he wants, before we talk about nutrition and training on either of these two, there are, for example, some people that have run both of them in combination. And I think, Steve, if I was going to do that, and I'll just make a quick aside on this particular one, I would keep the Tbol higher, somewhere in the 30 milligram level, and I'd actually keep the Dbol as low as I possibly could. Again, 30, perhaps even less if I was running the two together, because it would be that combination of athletic ability and a little bit more gain than perhaps I'd get if I was running either of those individually. What do you think on that before we get into nutrition and training on either of these two?
Yeah, buddy, that's fine. At the end of the day, you guys are going to experiment with these steroids. It's not a one and done type situation. You're going to try them different ways, so it's important for you to experiment with them and see how they work for you. You'll learn the lesson pretty quick. If you want to go running on Dianabol, you'll learn your lesson pretty quick when your calves feel like they're about to explode. Trust me, I've been there and done that, and I know exactly what it's all about. So you'll learn your lesson. Now, in terms of diet and training, very, very important topic, fasting. A lot of people want to know, can I fast on these steroids? So with Dianabol, because Dianabol increases appetite so much, and I don't recommend fasting on it. It's a poor choice. But Turinabol, you can fast on it. And by fasting, I mean doing 24-hour fast, 36-hour fast. I don't recommend doing prolonged fasts and using any type of anabolic steroid, because you're not taking full advantage of the fast. And, I explain this a million times to people. The entire point of fasting is to not put anything in your system. So now you're putting very powerful male hormones, adding them to your system during your fast. It's not really going to give you the full benefits that you should. Now, can you do that? Sure, you can do that. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to go catabolic. I don't want to lose my muscle, blah, blah, so I'll run an anabolic steroid with it. Look, at the end of the day, you're not going to lose muscle tissue when you fast. You're going to lose body fat. Your body's always going to shed body fat first. What you will lose, though, on a fast is strength, but it's temporary. You lose the strength on the fast. When you come off the fast, you'll gain back your strength and more. So again, just suck it up and deal with it when you're fasting. So I recommend, if you're doing a 24-hour, 36-hour fasting here and there, alternate day fasting, a lot of time restricted eating, stuff like that, Tbol absolutely is going to be completely fine. Dianabol will not. I would not do time restricted eating in a 2-hour window, 4-hour, and 6-hour window, 24-hour fasting, 36-hour fasting, etc. when you're using Dbol. Dbol is just going to make you hungry a lot. And Mobster could talk about this too. That's the issue. So if you're looking to cut, Dbol is a poor choice. If you're looking to cut, Tbol is a good choice. That's the difference between them. You're talking about a bulker versus a cutter, and that's a perfect example. Why? Because of the appetite changes that you'll experience. On Dbol, I wanted to eat everything. I wanted to eat 2 meals. I wanted seconds. I wanted thirds when I was on Dbol. Tbol doesn't do that to your appetite. It doesn't fuck with your appetite. That's why I like Tbol for cutting. So that's the whole idea behind it. So if you want a bulk, definitely go with Dbol. When it comes to training, again, endurance, athletics, high intensity stuff, leave that to the Tbol. Dbol, stick to more. I'm in the gym. I'm a power lifter. I'm a perma bulker. I wanna lift in the gym. I want to do 5 rep, 6 rep, 4 reps in the gym. That's where Dbol shines. Okay, and then drop sets. I want to leave the gym with my arms and veins popping out of my skin and my calves and my arms. Drop sets, high repetitions to finish your workout out. You'll walk out of the gym when your muscles pumped up like you wouldn't believe. Crazy vascularity. It's like a balloon. You know what I'm saying? And that's going to be the advantage of using it. So that's what that covers my training and diet advice there. So Mobster, talk about training and diet tips that you would give before you take us into the disclaimer. Give some tips for the guys out there.
Right. So right now, guys, I'm running a bulk, and let me just. I think Steve's going to raise an eyebrow. I'll probably be able to hear him raising his eyebrow. This is what I ate last night, and then my experience walking to the gym, and this is on a combination of products, but specifically it includes Dianabol. So for the pump side of things, right? So today was arm day, Stephen. Last night I had a pizza, and in pudding. Dessert, if you like, was cookie dough. And then I think I had some other crap as well. I'm not even going to get into the bulk side, the shit I ate last night. But I was going to be fueled to fuck on carbs last night. A lot of protein in there, but an inordinate amount of carbs, Steve, to get into, because today was arm day and it's heavy arm day. So what would that mean in terms of strength? Today, and I come and check my log out on the form to see the kind of shit I get up to. Today was heavy hammer curls, Steve, and skull crushers. And just to finish off, some tricep press downs. I got pumped walking to the gym. Okay, so I was getting shin pumps walking to the gym. The last time I got shin pumps was Anavar years ago, but the Dbol was pumping me walking to the gym. I got on the scales and I'm back to my all-time highest body weight, Steve, of 334 pounds. It is ugly. It's not good for my fitness. And the moment this cycle's done and the strength targets that I've got in mind that I want to hit on this particular cycle's done, I'm definitely dropping 6 or 7 pounds and getting back to a bit more functional, a bit more comfortable, and no pumps, just walking to the gym. Hammer curls, Steve, were 90 kilograms. That's 200 pounds dumbbell for hammer curls. And skull crusher was over 200 pounds. And I think there was actually a couple of reps there, but I was hanging. It's tiring being that heavy. And it has to be said, there's a little bit bloated, but the pump was, yes, definitely some pump there for real. And the whole thing of this is for me to do some absolutely crazy, fucked off, potentially lifetime personal best on the bench press, which is coming in the next couple of weeks. So it is definitely a choice for me to be doing those particular things. Now, if I'd chosen Tbol and if my targets differ, and they will definitely differ when I come off this cycle, Steve, I'll definitely be looking back for my regular daily cardio level, increasing how I feel comfortable with the body weight, which will drop, and being more functional. Basically, not getting knackered walking up and down stairs, Steve. And as Steve says, Tbol would be great if I was walking up a mountain. We've got plenty of those kind of things here. So there's going to be a lot more of that, a lot less weight. Simply put, I would be doing more cardiovascular activity as a part of my overall training if I was on Tbol. But for right now, in combination with what other products I'm using, it's all about the power and strength. It's about being as ugly and horrible and bloated and whatever the fuck it needs to be as strong as possible. And just as an example again, Steve, hanging out of my ass in terms of getting to the gym last week and then one of the best bench press sessions I've ever had, because in terms of me being under the bar for very, very low sets and reps, I was moving some absolutely massive weight. And again, that includes Dianabol, because I know I respond incredibly well to that. So again, listeners, these are personal experiences. You're not necessarily going to be doing what I'm doing. You're not using the other products that I'm doing in combination. My choices are my own choices in order for me to get to that particular place that I want to go to. Mentally, for example, Steve, I'm trying to explore a new place mentally as well as physically in order for me to get a personal best. And some of the stuff that I'm doing, and Steve knows this, and if you come on forums, you'll see this, some of the shit I'm doing is world class. Some of the stuff I've done in the past is world class. It's world record level stuff in terms of me doing my particular niche with the grip stuff or whatever else. I have to be thinking and acting and performing a certain particular way. But right now, and again, I'm using Dbol as I say, it's not about how I feel outside the gym. It's not about me climbing up a mountain. It's not about my cardiovascular ability. It's all about raw, brute power, doing crazy, fucked up, heavy shit in the gym. And even just in the higher reps on hammer curls, today was horrible, brutal. People looking, and if I was taking photographs for this podcast, they'd probably love it. And I'd probably love it. But in terms of actually doing it, it's just nasty and horrible. So you have to make these choices. Your training program should look like it's any training program that you guys do, any nutritional program you do, any recovery that you do should be specific for your aim. Come onto the forums and check out some of the logs that we have. And sometimes we have to tweak what looks like a mess, random isolating exercises when a person just was raw. If you want to be raw brute power, you need to strip away the bullshit. You just need to be doing the thing. If you're athletic, for example, again, a shot put, Steve, you need to be doing stuff in training that recognizes a shot put. It needs to assist the exercise that you're doing. Same thing with hill climbing and everything else. If you want to lose weight, if you want to trim waist, if you want to get lean, then sometimes, and Steve and I have seen this multiple times, you need to take certain foods out. Like Steve said, you need to fast. They can almost, and I think Steve can talk about this on another show in just for an hour, about you can almost reset the gut flora by fasting. If you've got digestive issues, stop eating crap for a couple of days, 36 hours, like Steve said, and you can almost reset the stomach, give it a break from the crap that you've been putting in, and help clean the system up, so to speak, and stuff like that. So again, we advise you to come on the forums, tell us what you're looking to achieve with your body, talk about companies like Para Pharma, making the right choices for performance enhancement, and getting the best you possibly can out of your training with our encouragement, with our advice. Touch on that, Steve, before I take us into the disclaimer.
I think you covered it, buddy. Let's go to the disclaimer where it was a great show, and come on the forums, definitely.
Right. Please note, we're not doctors, and opinions of ours is our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational entertainment. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.